It was the end of 2021, the year I stopped writing novels and decided to do poetry. In April, I published the socially conscious Blues for the Babes, and then, in November, I followed it up with The Velvet Bazaar, an erotic fantasia. I'd always wanted to bring a more visual aspect to the world of literature, so for both poetry collections, I began bringing the words to life through short videos. With Blues for the Babes, I played with the mountain of discarded pop artifacts and stock footage, and with The Velvet Bazaar, I assembled a haze of urban sophistication and suburban sleaze. It was rock and roll Rimbaud, Warhol meets Whitman. Even though it was December, and The Velvet Bazaar had barely been out a month, I was already thinking of the third and final collection in my Digital Decadence trilogy. The Digital Decadence trilogy was a cycle of poetry that focused on the highs and lows of coming of age in a digital age, and I wanted the last one to feel like a grand finale, a culmination of all that came before. And that's when I came up with the idea of a literary film, a visual representation of the soon-to-be written collection. In this film, there would be a video for each and every poem. I had no idea what the poems would even be about. I just knew I wanted to do something that no one had ever attempted before. I wanted to create something totally new. And the clips couldn't be just old footage or random shots of places. They'd have to exist and stand on their own. They'd have to be unique and unlike the last. Many pop stars I admired created full visual accompaniments to their albums. So I figured, why, as a poet, couldn't I do the same with a book? So I began with the concept. Channel Nevermind would be a dystopian, public access TV station, the kind one would stumble across in the middle of the night and find the most surreal and bizarre concoctions. I wanted to recreate the freewheeling atmosphere of public access in the 1980s and 90s, a time of free speech and outlandish passion, a time of risque, anarchic playgrounds where rules and regulations no longer existed. Part of this came out of pure childhood nostalgia, of remembering the strange transmissions coming at the earlier end of my cable channels, the raw, amateur forms of expression. But another part of this came from a desire to simply have fun again, to come up from the underground and breathe once more. After 2 years of fear, people were starting to enjoy their lives and crave new experiences. They were feeling good about themselves again. And I wanted to create something that reflected that weird mixture of desperation and pleasure, of nervous splendor. To evoke this feel-good vibe in the poetry, I looked toward literature that epitomized the hedonism of their respective eras. I dug into the jazz-age tales of Fitzgerald's doomed romances amongst Ivy League flappers, and Evelyn Waugh's adventures amongst the depraved, declining, bright young things. With us now in the 2020s, between eras and upheavals, I wanted to capture the similarities and differences of those periods to reflect the same feeling of youth of a certain age, still desiring to keep their decadence a top priority, for better or worse. At the same time, as a part of a generation raised on the internet, I also wanted to reflect the alienation that complicates those feelings of pleasure with technology. I wanted to write about ignoring texts and AI romance and hate following. So I took the dark cyberpunk tales of William Gibson's as cues on making Channel Nevermind something that captures a future that has yet to be met. With the literary style intact, next came the soundtrack. Music to me is ultra important to every project I pursue. It guides the mood and the flow and rhythm. It makes everything come together. So when I start a project, I have to pick the right soundscape or it won't work at all. But for Channel Nevermind, it seemed rather clear to me that there was only one style of music that could make the collection come together: city pop. City pop is actually a rather unofficial name for the commercialized pop that exploded in Japan during the 1980s. It was bright, shiny, and cosmopolitan, a reflection of an era of nightclubs, sports cars, and designer clothes. In other words, it was perfect. As I went down the rabbit hole of research, combing for the most potent pieces of music I could find, I began to realize that although everything else was coming together, there was one huge thing I'd forgotten about. Who was going to help me film all these videos? 20 videos are already a great deal for one project, but to do them all by myself, especially with the visions I had, seemed to be a complete impossibility. So I did what any other self-respecting artist would do. I reached out to my friends. First, I asked Brett. He and I had already worked together on a couple of the videos for the Velvet Bazaar, and since we hung out all the time, there was a level of familiarity and comfortability that I knew was essential to making this project as great as it could be. Next, I asked my cousin Stevie if she'd help. She was coming to visit that March, and even though I set the release for April, I knew we could squeeze in some last-minute filming without any issue. We also always worked harmoniously, with ease and without effort. And luckily they both said yes, so it all began. Filming actually was the best part. I loved using places like the DIA as my own personal set for Neptune, or pretending to cry when I actually wanted to laugh during Cicada, or even standing out in the cold, windy weather pretending that it was summertime for Ultimate Fantasy. I think I've always wanted to be in front of the camera, and nothing could ruin the joy I was getting from doing so. Even though we began filming in late February, the last videos were done just a week before Channel Nevermind was released. I actually filmed those last videos myself. Brett had moved unexpectedly, and I had just gotten a tripod, so it seemed fateful to just place the camera and do my own magic. Interestingly enough, those became some of my favorite clips. Now, once filming was over, it was all about editing. Some people hate that part with a fiery passion, but I love it. I love editing, sculpting as I call it, getting the work down to its most perfect, immaculate design. When it comes to sculpting, I approach film the same way I approach literature, and sometimes I'm honestly never satisfied. But with Channel Nevermind, it all came together rather quickly, and before I knew it, the entire thing was done. I'd framed it like a lost videotape, as if the channel had been recorded ages ago and somehow discovered years later. I'd created an intro as the channel's host. And though I'd always considered adding music, at the last minute, I decided to let the words speak for themselves. I remember the day before I released the film, I watched the entire 20 minutes in one sitting, staring and trying not to critique my own work. But after a while, I naturally resisted my judgment and started loving it simply for what it was, a groundbreaking achievement. You see, I don't set out to be congratulated for the things I create. Oftentimes, it's simply about reaching people and making them feel heard. And with Channel Nevermind, I just wanted to bring a fresh new feeling to literature, to bring it out of the dusty confines of the last century and steadily into this one. But mostly, it just seemed like nobody was talking to my generation or those after us in a way that we understood. Many of us grew up in the 21st century and have a totally different understanding of life, identity, relationships, and love. I wanted to speak to us in our own language, on our own terms, in our own fashion. Channel Nevermind was the fusion of those desires. Looking back, I can't help but smile at the audacity of such a project. This is where the tide changed, where I came into my own entirely. I went from just being a pop writer to a pop artist, using the skills I'd only taught myself a year prior to create something extraordinary and out of this world. All it takes is love and determination to do what you wish. No one can stand in your way when you believe in yourself. Do not worry about what others think or feel. Just carve your path and look ahead. Many will not answer when you call, but one day they will know what you were saying.